Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill, the game that I feel like the boys have had circled on their calendars for really months at this point. Ohio State heading on the road to play the Oregon Ducks. I think clearly the two best teams in the Big Ten, and quite frankly, two of the best teams in the country after we just saw the SEC just throw up all over themselves on Saturday night. This is going to be a phenomenal football game. There's a reason the spread is sitting around a field goal. I think these are two of the best teams in the country. I think there's some really unique matchups that we're going to see in this football game as well. Offensive-minded head coach Ryan Day, defensive-minded head coach and Dan Lanning. Going to be an absolute battle, one of the best games in the season. Now, before we get into it, as always, I think most importantly for a game like this, let it fly. Whether you're an Ohio State fan, an Oregon fan, whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree, that's the beauty of breaking down a game like this. So let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I think the most fascinating matchup in this football game, this Oregon offense that is starting to find its stride, going up against an Ohio State defense that everybody wants to talk about, Jeremiah Smith, and what he's doing. He's been phenomenal. This Ohio State defense is sitting here, 6.8 points per game allowed, number one in the country, 3.5 yards per play, number one in the country. This is good on good. How do you see this matchup playing out?
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how good Ohio State is, essentially, because I think the one thing I want to see is what this pass rush is totally made of, because that to me is kind of what separated them from being historically great last year from being really good. And I mean, you've seen the steps Jack Sawyer's taken. You've seen what JTT's been doing. I think Tyleik Williams coming back into this, he makes a huge difference. He's a real hammer from the inside. Very disruptive, good on stunts. So that's kind of what I'm interested to see, is how good this pass rush is against an Oregon offensive line that's been kind of up and down in pass pro. It's been really good for the past couple of weeks, but they obviously showed a couple of
two things if you're Ohio State. One, I think what makes this pass rush so special, I mean, it's sitting there 12% sack rate on opposing dropbacks. That is number one in the country. They're getting after the quarterback. I think what makes this Ohio State pass rush so good is it is so multidimensional. There are so many different, I mean, it's headlined by Jack Sawyer and JTT, but the guys on the inside, some of the reserves that they have coming on the field, they all can get it done in a lot of different ways. I'm most interested in seeing how Jim Knowles challenges the communication of this Oregon offensive line, because quite frankly, I look at Oregon's offensive line with Nashad back in, they've figured out their offensive line, at least in my opinion. That being said, when we've seen Oregon have struggles, it's more on some of those game stunts, twists, pressures that other teams bring. The communication hasn't been great.
Ohio State did a really good job against that with Iowa. I think if you watch that game, I mean, they were getting home on those twists, sending backers and safeties, and they have some real dangerous ones. I mean, Caleb Downs, when he comes on pressures, really, really explosive. You probably say the same thing about guys like Sonny Styles. So there's some guys who can come from depth who are really good at closing the space, and that probably is, and you said it best, that's where Oregon wasn't exactly shining, if you will, was picking that stuff up.
And to be fair, Oregon has cleaned it up, but if you're Jim Knowles, you want to make sure it's cleaned up against this kind of front seven. Now, I think the second fascinating conversation, and quite frankly, this is going to be a conversation we have for both defenses, this Oregon passing attack is predicated on getting the football to in space. They don't push the ball all that much down the field. Dylan Gabriel's average depth of target sitting at 6.5 yards. They don't challenge you vertically all that much. They haven't, at least on the film as well. The numbers certainly back it up. But what they do exceptionally well is yards after the catch. Oregon has thrown for over just around 1,400 yards. 917 of those yards have come after the catch. You look at this Ohio State defense, it is sitting at 5.5 yards per pass attempt. That's top 10 in the country. They just aren't letting you hit explosive plays, but they are giving you a 63% completion percentage. So they're giving you the stuff underneath. Oregon's going to take that stuff underneath. How well does Ohio State tackle this caliber of athlete, guys like Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, and Evan Stewart? That's what I'm looking at, because you look at tackling guys like what they have on Iowa, what they have on Michigan State, that's not going to really test you that much. Tackling Tez Johnson in open space, that's kind of a different animal. I feel like one of the biggest storylines is how well this Ohio State secondary tackles these playmakers in space on Saturday night.
And I think the linebacker unit's going to be the key to that, because their secondary guys, I think, tackle. Caleb Downs, obviously a very good tackler. Their cornerbacks both tackle. But I feel like where they've missed some things is their linebackers in space. And that's been a little bit surprising to me, is how athletics on a guy like Sonny Styles is how much like coming down from that safety spot and converting into that linebacker room. I feel like he's still kind of getting the hang of where he's supposed to be. Just it's more about positioning than the athleticism.
Yes.
And I just think when you look at how Tez Johnson and Terrence Ferguson have been tearing teams up through the middle, he's going to need to have a big game because he's designed perfectly to deal with this Oregon offense. I mean, that athleticism, that speed, that size, like it all complements each other. But he's going to need to have his, like, I want to head on a swivel, like just play a more comfortable game than some of what I think we've seen.
I think you said it right. Like taking away the middle of the field, like that is where Tez, and they do such a good job. And this is a potential flaw, but we kind of talked about it. You don't see it as a flaw. And you take a look at the target distribution for Oregon, like 52 targets have gone to Tez Johnson on the year. The next leading target is Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart, both tied at 23. And so, like, Tez Johnson is the centerpiece in this offense. Can Ohio State do their best to take him away? Now, it's easier said than done because Will Stein does such a good job at moving Tez Johnson all around the formation, getting him the matchups that suit him, which oftentimes is dealing with linebackers in space. Like, they're going to attack the middle of the field where these linebackers are sinking in zone and let Tez Johnson just create some space. That's going to be a really interesting kind of battle.
That's where I get, like, when you talk about target distribution, I feel like teams have been trying to put a lid on this Oregon defense. I mean, I haven't seen a ton of teams playing their safeties up around the line of scrimmage. And that, when I look at these Ohio State corners, Igbenos and Denzel Burke, that might be the best combo in college football. I mean, Denzel Burke, hammer. Davison Igbenos plays really, really good too. That's where I look like Ken Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart. If they bring Caleb Downs back into the box, if they bring Lathan Ransom back into the box, can they hurt teams? Because I think, frankly, you've seen those two get loose down the field, and I think they can do it. I just think a lot of teams have tried to play more of a bend, don't break against them. I don't think that's what Ohio State's going to do. I think you're going to get a heavy dosage of Downs down in the box trying to take away that middle of the field. That's where I think you really get into. I mean, I know they haven't been a super explosive yet, but they certainly have the weapons to do it. So that, to me, is where I think it's going to get interesting. I just don't think they've had to yet.
You might see some of those like this. Again, I feel like this game's going to come down to a few big plays. Like when they do decide to drop these safeties into the box and maybe take away a guy like Tez, can Dillon Gabriel and Evan Stewart link up for one of those deeper third throws? That's probably what you're looking at. Really quick, like Ohio State's really good against the run, only allowing 2.3 yards per carry. Did a really nice job defending that outside zone concept that Iowa runs. That's probably where Oregon had their most success running the football Friday night with some of that outside zone stuff. That's going to be kind of an interesting battle. I would be, as good as the rushing attack for Oregon looked on Friday night against Michigan State, I would be surprised if that's the avenue that Oregon wins this football game, because you look at that front seven, and not only these edge rushers really good at getting after the passer, they're really good stopping the run and setting edges. So I do think Dillon Gabriel and these wide receivers, if Oregon moves the football, I do think it'll probably be mostly through the air and just kind of getting some balance in the rushing game. Let's flip sides here. This Ohio State offense has been just a buzzsaw. And kind of a funny, similar conversation. The passing attack, kind of similar. Like you look at Will Howard's average depth of target, 7.5 yards. Over half of their receiving yards have come after the catch as well. Now you have Tez Johnson kind of being the dude for Oregon. You got two dudes on Ohio State, Emeka and Jeremiah Smith. Now Carnell Tate is good too, but it is the I wouldn't say a two-man show, but you look at Jeremiah Smith and Emeka and what they've been doing. That's where they want to have that passing attack go through. This is a secondary that's really good, led by Jabbar Muhammad. Take a look at their numbers: 56% completion percentage, top 25 in the country, only 5.3 yards per pass. I feel like in a very similar conversation we just had with Ohio State's defense. You feel like bringing these Ohio State wide receivers down in space is going to be a massive storyline in this football game.
And that's where it's going to be about Will Howard, because it's not about the wide receivers. Those guys, when they get their shots and they get one-on-one matchups, they've been winning them. I mean, you've seen Jeremiah Smith. Like, we talk a lot about Ryan Williams. I feel like at the neglect of, like, Jeremiah Smith might be the better player.
This could be that game where it's like, Ryan Williams had that game against Georgia. Like, Ohio State just hasn't played a team where Jeremiah Smith is making those phenomenal catches in big-time moments.
If you get a one-on-one matchup against a guy like Jabbar Muhammad, who about as good as it comes in that cornerback position for Oregon, like if he makes those plays, I think Ohio State's really hard to deal with. Because at the end of the day, you look, they're a team that really gets horizontal on you. They can throw the ball out into the flat. Their running backs are really, really good at getting to the edge. Quinshon Judkins playing more fresh, it feels like, is playing at a far higher level than I think he was playing at Ole Miss last year. So
Yes,
this is an offense that if you can't get guys into the box, especially with what Will Howard can do with his legs, I think is really hard to deal with. But I think that's not as much about Ohio State's wide receivers. It's about Will Howard being able to trust him to make those throws, because that's probably the one thing I think. I mean, it's not like the old Ohio State teams where you could count on your quarterbacks consistently.
yeah, this isn't CJ Stroud. But yeah, no, I would agree with that 100%. Dill, I do feel like this is a game where we see Will Howard use the legs. Like, I think that's why they brought him in. Like, yeah, he's been a very solid passer. The numbers are good. The film's good. But, like, why were we so excited about Will Howard and then you bring in Chip Kelly? It's like what he can do with his legs. Now, Ohio State hasn't had to ask him and haven't really asked him yet to use his legs. There's zero doubt in my mind. Like, there are certain schemes and concepts that Ohio State has been saving for this football game, just like probably what Oregon's been doing too. Like, I think you're going to see some different things from both of these teams, kind of knowing, hey, we're going to get through our first 5 games. Oregon has obviously had some more scares than they would have liked. That being said, like, I think there are some bullets in the chamber for both of these offenses, and one of those bullets I really do think is what Will Howard can do in the run game. You obviously have Henderson, you obviously have Judkins, but I do feel like you see Will Howard probably get a little bit more involved in his legs than we've seen the first 5 games.
Yeah, and that's just about getting those other 2 loose, because that is one thing. And Ohio State's offensive line's played good. I don't think it's been wildly impressive. I mean, it's been a good unit, but like, I don't think it's been dominant. But when they give their running backs cracks of daylight, it just feels like it's over. I mean, they're so explosive through that. That to me, I think Will Howard can allow them to shine a little bit more.
I think another storyline is how, I mean, like, these linebackers for Oregon are kind of another level of athletic, you know, and you mentioned it. Ohio State likes to kind of go horizontal and win with their speed. Like, that's one of those things I'm looking at too, is can Oregon go sideline to sideline and match the athleticism and speed that Ohio State has? I think the second thing I'm looking at is, we spent all this offseason talking about Oregon game records on the defensive line. I think they have it. Like, a headline by guys like Jordan Burch and Derek Harmon. Can you create some negative plays? Like, we haven't seen Ohio State have to operate in those 3rd and long situations all that much. One, just because they just score whenever they touch the football, but more importantly, they don't really take negative plays. Can Oregon create some negative plays? They've been doing a very good job of that over the last couple of weeks. Force Will Howard into some of those obvious passing situations where he does need to push the ball down the field a little bit more vertically. That's something that I'm looking at. And when you do get into those situations, can you maybe take advantage of that right side of the offensive line? Like, I think Josh Simmons, that left side for Ohio State, I think is quite good. But the right side with Tegra and Josh Fryer, probably not as reliable. I think Ohio State fans would agree. Can you find your matchups, and can you maybe take advantage of that side of the offensive line?
If you can, I mean, Will Howard, that has probably been the one thing that I think's been disappointing with him, is he has made some really bad decisions. And he's only got 3 picks on the year. That number, I think, could be quite a bit higher. So he has thrown those type of balls. I think if Oregon can try to heat him up, can you get him making those type of decisions that, again, they haven't killed Ohio State yet, obviously. They've rolled through pretty much everyone they've played, but he's made a handful of them. That Michigan State game, he made 2 early on in that game that, I mean, kept Michigan State alive in it. Dillon Gabriel, frankly, did the same thing. So both these quarterbacks, again, they're going to see a different level of defense, a different level of aggression. Will Howard, Dillon Gabriel, like, can you somehow force mistakes respectively? Because, again, you've seen, for veteran quarterbacks, you've seen more than you probably want in both cases.
Let's get to the pick here. Ohio State coming on the road to Autzen Stadium, 3.5-point favor. Still, this line has moved so much. Like, Oregon to open up the season was 2.5-point favorites at home. Now it's flipped almost 5 points, actually 5 points. Ohio State 3.5-point favorites on the road. Who are you taking here?
I love Ohio State. I think their physicality up front is going to be a bit of a challenge for this Oregon team. I thought their offensive line was going to be so good coming in. It's again, you've kind of said it. They kind of found their footing a little bit. This is such a different level animal than what they've seen from anyone yet. I think the secondary is really tough. I think, again, if they can just get their safeties down, if they can rely on their corners to play really good on the edge and prevent those big plays, and they can get Caleb Downs in the box to kind of deal with Tez Johnson, I think they can put themselves in a really good position to sit on Oregon a little bit.
Yeah, this is an impossible pick. I'm going to go Oregon. For one, you're going to give me 3.5 points at home for Oregon, taking that every single day of the week. Secondly, like I think I'm not trying to get too much into the gambling weeds here, but I think the bookmaker's a little wrong about this Oregon team. Like they haven't looked very good, but you've seen the flashes of what their ceiling can be. Now I picked Oregon to win the Big Ten preseason. I'm going to stick with that pick. I'm going to take Oregon. Now the question is, can Oregon maintain that ceiling for 4 quarters? Because you're not winning this football game. You haven't really seen Oregon really play a complete game outside of Oregon State. They're going to need to play a complete game against Ohio State here to win. But I do think that ceiling is high enough and good enough to win this football game. Give me Oregon in 3.5 points. You're on Ohio State. This is definitely an instant reaction episode Saturday night. Probably going to talk a lot about this matchup over the next couple of days. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.